Okay, let's do some satin stitching. This is going to be Beginner's Guide to Inkstitch, the Satin Stitch. There's going to be a lot, probably a lot in this video. I'll try to cut as much as I can, but probably going to be a lot in this video. I showed you in the last video how to make a basic satin stitch, where you can do it by node or you can do it by rung. I'm just going to make another one real quick. These are identical. They have the same number of nodes and all that good stuff. We'll make two rails, combine them, extensions, Inkstitch params. And then we're going to select satin, custom satin column. There's our satin column. Apply and quit. I'm going to duplicate that and scoot it over. Yep, try again. Duplicate that and scoot one over. Now we're going to do this one with rungs. We'll put one there, we'll put one there, and we'll put one there. Since I did all that, I have to recombine this because it has new elements. Control K, extensions, Inkstitch params, satin column, custom satin column. Hit apply and quit. We can look at both of these, extensions, Inkstitch params. They should be pretty darn close to identical. One's done with nodes, one's done with rungs. One of the things about doing in the olden days, before the current version, if you did it by node and you did not have the same number of nodes, now one has 3, one has 2, it would fail. But now it works just fine. It appears, as far as I can tell, that anytime there's an off number of nodes, it ignores the extra one. But if you add one on the other side and you adjust it accordingly, you can change the direction of the satin column stitch out. In other words, I go to extensions, Inkstitch params, and now you can see that it's taking a hard turn up to the right, and then it takes another hard turn to the left to match back up to the original. You can also do this with rungs. If I do this, it should turn out pretty close to exactly the same as what we just did. You see it taking that turn, and then it's going to fix itself. Now, this is really good to know. The number one place where this is good to know, come on, is when you do a square or some other more complicated design. Get rid of that fill. Let's see what our stroke is 6 mil. Let's take that down to 4. Extensions, Inkstitch, tools, satin, convert line to satin. The new Inkstitch is much better about converting those satins. Extensions, Inkstitch params. So I want you to take note that the stitch pattern is straight until it gets right there to the corner, and then it takes a really hard turn. Such a hard turn that it has to pull back some of that. And what that is short stitch inset. So it's pulling it back by 15% for that short stitch. Now, we can make this look a little nicer by doing what I internally note as leaning into the curve. I'm going to go to my node tool, and on these corners, I'm going to do what I call leaning into the turn, which is that. So we're just going to look at that one. Now you see a definite difference between the corner that I modified and the corners that were previously set by the automatic conversion to satin stitch. And I prefer doing that almost all of the time, which I did it by, I exaggerated it a little bit, but I prefer doing it that way. And any time that I'm doing things like this, I will do the lean into the curve, for lack of a better term. That's just what I think of it as. And we'll take a look at all of it. Params. This is what the whole box looks like now. For me, depending, and then it depends a lot on the situation, the design that you have. You may or may not want to do this, but I usually do this whenever I'm doing something like this. And we're going to go ahead and get rid of that. Okay, so let's talk about some basics on the Satin Stitch. You go into params. We have the custom Satin Stitch. There's some underlays that you need to know about, such as center walk, contour, zigzag, and the stroke does not do anything for the Satin Stitch. And we're talking about center walk, contour, zigzag. The center walk, if you select that, it'll run a line down the middle. Uncheck that. Contour, run one out around the outside, Zigzag will run a zigzag. And you can actually use multiples of these, although I don't necessarily recommend it. If you have a piece of fabric that is very stretchy and soft and wants to move around a lot on you, it's probably a good idea you can actually use something like this. I almost never do more than one, and the one that I use the most is the contour by itself. But you can do what you need, whatever applies, multiple ones, doesn't matter. You really should have something that holds your piece of fabric down for you while it's finishing out that satin column. So a lot of the times you'll be using satin columns making letters. So we could take this satin column right here. I'm going to adjust it just a little bit. We can add another satin column to it, and I'm going to go right here from about middle, and then down to here, and then down to here. And go somewhere here and come out, come over and come down. And that's going to be another satin column. And since we can do it that way, I'm just going to go ahead and do it without the rungs. It's probably a good idea to get used to doing it with rungs, but understand that you can do it without the rungs. Now this one, I'm guessing this one's probably not going to look right. I'm showing you this because I'm expecting it to not look right without the rungs. So we're going to go into params. I've already combined it. Satin column, custom satin column. Well, it actually looks pretty good. The only thing that I would change on it, I would actually do rungs on this one because I want the stitch outs to be pretty parallel. I'm going to go ahead and do that. Get all of them, combine, extensions, Inkstitch, params, and custom satin column. That's better. Hit apply and quit. Now for the other one, to make our N, is going to be this one. And all I'm going to do is duplicate that column, and I'm going to drag it right over here. Put it about the same place. So now we have an N. I'm not going to show you how to add full font library to the lettering tool at this point. That's going to be in another video. That one's got a lot. But if we take all of this and we look at it, we should have a letter N stitch out. Very nice. And that's all it takes to do letters. So that's an example of a letter where you don't need running stitches in order to go on to the next column. I'll show you another example where you do. let's go ahead and get rid of all that. So let's get into some more advanced letter E design. Now we can still do it with this. I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to go into here and make it 2. And then we're going to go extensions, Inkstitch, tool satin, convert line to satin. It should be stitching in that from right to left direction. Go to, let's check it out. Go to extensions, Inkstitch params. It should be stitching right to left. And it is. So what I'm going to do with this is for the advanced, more satisfying technique. This is a little easier on your machine. That every time you do a column, it's going to lock stitch on both ends. I don't always want it to lock stitch on both ends, especially when I'm doing very small letters. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here and where it says lock stitches, allow lock stitches both. I'm just going to do before. I want the lock stitches at the beginning of this column. Now I don't have any at the end, which is fine. The cursor is stopping at the top. I want that to actually stop. Let's see, do I want it? Nope, top is fine. I think top is fine. A lot of this is just planning ahead. A lot of this is just you've done it many times before and you just kind of know what you want it to look like. It doesn't help in a beginner guide, I understand, but it's just like everything else. They say practice makes perfect. That will definitely get you a long ways. And the difference between stopping at the top or stopping at the bottom on this stop cursor. Let me show you an example. So I'm going to make it stop. I'm going to make it stop that cursor on the bottom by doing a swap rails. Now, I swapped the rails and now the cursor's stopping at the bottom. This is important, especially when you're doing letters, because now that it's stopping at the bottom, I can make my next one come from right about in that same vicinity. Just down a little ways, duplicate that, bring it over. And I'm going to press Shift and select both of those, Control K to combine, extensions, Inkstitch params. Now I need this one to start on the left hand side. Starts on the right hand side. I'm going to swap rails again. Now it's starting on the right hand side. Since this is all the same part of the letter E, this time I don't want any lock stitches. So we're going to go down to the lock stitch and do neither. Hit apply and quit. Now, where the magic is between doing it that way is when you look at both of these together, that top column stops all the way out on the bottom. The next column starts right next to where that top column stops. So if we look at this, extensions, Inkstitch params, you'll see that it stops on the bottom and it picks up right again for the next column. And that's how I do all of the E. I'll go from here, do a running stitch, apply and quit. I'll do a running stitch, knowing that it ends right here. I'll do a running stitch out to where I want that next one to start. I want the next one to end at the top. So this is going to be a running stitch. Remember, stroke stitches are automatically running stitches, but I'm still going to go into params and I'm going to turn off the lock stitches. Hit apply and quit. Now we're going to make another satin column going from about here to here and here to here. You need to overlap it a little bit for the pull compensation. So make sure you overlap it just a little bit. And then I'm going to select both of those, combine. Don't select that running stitch. Running stitch stays. Go into params, satin column, custom satin column. Starts on the bottom, ends on the top. I want it to stay ending on the top, and if I switch this, it's going to end on the bottom. So all I'm going to do here is I'm going to change that running stitch to end on the bottom. Just like that. It's going to pick up right where it left off. It's going to end on the top, and I can continue. In Inkstitch, I figured out the hard way that whichever side you start on is going to start on the other side. Let's see if that holds out. I'm going to start there. I'm going to start here. We're going to combine both of those. Shift to select. Control K to combine. Extensions, Inkstitch params. It should start on the top right. Satin column, custom satin column. And it does. It ends on the left. Not exactly where I wanted it to end, but it'll work. Hit apply and quit, because we still want it to start right here. It ends over here on the left. So all we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're basically duplicating that top one. Actually, you can duplicate that top one. Watch this. Duplicate. Scroll out a little bit. Drag it on down. Now, for this, the original that I just copied started on the right, ended on the bottom. I want it to start on the top left. So we're going to go into params, extensions, Inkstitch params. We are going to reverse both rails, and it starts on the top and it ends up going out. So just like that, this one's done. We're going to look at the whole thing in a simulator. And there's your E. Oh, you know what I forgot? Here's what I forgot. No, definitely don't want to forget this. So come on down. I need to reselect that one. Let's go into extensions, Inkstitch params. And we want lock rails to be neither. Or lock stitches neither. On this one, we want lock stitches neither. Hit apply and quit. Now on this bottom one, we duplicated that other one, so it's going to lock stitch at the beginning and not at the end. We want the opposite of that. Extensions, Inkstitch params. Lock stitch after. So it sounds a little counterproductive to remove lock stitches, but the fact that everything's stitching starts and ends together, and there's a lock stitch at the beginning and it runs all the way through, and then there's a lock stitch at the end. A stitch ain't coming out. This is really handy when you're doing very small satin stitches or satin columns. All right, let's get rid of that. Let's start talking about params. Let's do a line. Let's make it a 4 and convert. Okay. So there's my satin stitch. I'm going to make it a little longer. And something that's simple. You can just drag it out. Okay, so we have a pretty long little satin line there. Column. Starts at the top. Good. Okay. So let's look at params. We're going to go step by step in the params. Method, satin column. Method, E-stitch. If I zoom in on this, you can see that E-stitch. Now, if you need that E-stitch to be on the other side, you're going to swap the rails. It's that easy. Now the E-stitch is on the other side. Unswap, E-stitch, S-stitch. Now this S stitch, I have not actually used it yet, but it's very cool. And from what I read, I think Gus said it, but don't quote me on that. S-Stitch is offered in a lot of professional digitizing programs. And now it's, since this version, it's now offered in Inkstitch. Very cool. And zigzag. So it's really hard to tell what that is doing different than a standard satin stitch. So we're going to actually go look at Inkstitch.org and see the example that they show. So if you look at the Inkstitch.org documentation, the satin stitch is from going sideways is a vertical line followed by the horizontal, vertical, horizontal. The zigzag is, it kind of cuts off in between, and it does more of a sawtooth. Well, no, this is more sawtooth. It does more of a zigzag. It's well named, zigzag. So that's the difference there. It's still going to come out basically the same, but you may have reasons to use one over the other. So we'll go ahead and set that back to a standard satin column. And don't forget about your underlays in case you need it. Contour underlay is the one I use a lot. Now, let's go ahead and look at the underlay params real quick. Stitch length, 3 mil. That is a maximum. Stitch tolerance, 0.2. Inset distance, 0.4. What that 0.4 means is 0.4 millimeters from the outside of your satin stitch is where that is. So if we exaggerate that a little bit and we set it to 1, you'll see that it's mostly on the inside, or more on the inside. I'm going to set that back to 0.4. And this is a fixed distance. You can also do proportional. So instead of doing that, we'll set that to 0. And we'll set a 10% in. Since it's 4 mil wide, 10% is 0.4, I think. So it's actually that actually makes it the same place. Set that back to 0, set that back to 0.4. Turn off contour. Let's go back to satin stitch. Short stitch distance. If you're making a hard turn, this is where your 0.25 mil comes in. You don't make it 2.5 mil short when it does a short stitch distance. The hard turn, like I showed in the square. Zigzag spacing, peak to peak. The peak to peak is how close together the stitching is. So if you want it to be less dense, you set that to a higher number. Now you have a much less dense stitching. 0.4 is default. And 0.3 is about as low as I usually go. Makes a really dense satin stitch. Set that back to 0.4. Pull comp, depending on your fabric, you should set pull comp. If it's something very stretchy and soft, you need to set the pull comp a little higher. If it's something not very soft, like duck cloth, it's not going to give a lot, then you can set this to a lower number. Most of the time, I actually do my pull comp during digitizing and don't set a number here. I just make sure if I'm doing another satin column that I do an overlap. In other words, if I'm doing another satin column beside it, like so, I'll actually overlap it. That is my pull comp. And press shift and a color. Select both of those, or the whole thing. Extensions, Inkstitch params. You'll see my overlap. That is my pull compensation. If the stitching pulls the fabric, the overlap will cover up any gaps that might come in. So if I don't set an overlap, give me just one. I'm buttoning them right up next to each other. On a stretchy fabric, they're going to pull away from each other and you're going to end up with a gap in between. But if you set a pull compensation, Inkstitch params, I'll set a pull comp of 0.5 just for showing. Now you can see that they're overlapping again. If I don't set a pull comp, they're not overlapping. And that will most definitely have a gap in between when you do that on fabric. So you can set a 0.5, and that's about as much overlap as I had before when I just did it manually. Apply and quit. Let's go ahead and get rid of one of those. Back to the original. Extensions Inkstitch params. What's next? Okay, pull comp, reverse rails. Back in the day, Mac OS had a problem when you did a automatic satin stitch. It would reverse the rail, one of the rails by accident, and you'd end up with something that looked a lot like this. And then back in the day, you didn't have params to switch it, so you had to do it manually, which meant selecting one of the rails, like so, and going path reverse on one of the rails. That was the olden days way of doing it. Now we can do it in the params. Much better. And you can reverse rails. You can reverse both rails, so now it's going to stitch from bottom up. And swap rails switches the sides. The left rail becomes the right rail, and it'll switch sides that it starts on and ends on. So let's set both of these back. Random percentage of satin width increase. And it's kind of self-explanatory. Random percentage of satin width increase. Let's do a 50% and see if that'll show us. And you end up something really jagged like this because you're randomizing where each side is actually going to stitch to. And random percentage of satin width decrease does the same thing in the other direction. Set back to 0. I did that quite some time ago. I made it was a rock column with a metal arch between the two. For the rock column, I did a random percentage of satin width increase and got that rocky effect. Random zigzag spacing percentage. This is how close together your stitchings are. So you can randomize how close together they are. And you see this short stitch inset, this one right here. Let me do, if I remember how to do it, that one and that one should be, okay, so right here, you see this inset and this inset. That is this short stitch distance of 0.25 mil. That's what that is. So let's set that back to 0. Split method. So right here, instead of doing a split method, do maximum stitch length. I think I set a 4 again. Let me go back to, let me hit a 2 on maximum stitch length. Let me hit a 2.5. 3. Okay, we're going with 3. Must have made it 6. So random jitter for split stitches. This one's really cool because instead of having that solid hard line in the middle, we can do a random jitter on either side. Let's do plus or minus, let's exaggerate, let's do a plus or minus 25. Now you see all those really random jitters, what it's called, there in the middle, so that you don't have a hard line down the center. This is much better. And you can set that to whatever you want. There's also random phase for it. Hit random phase. And that randomizes just about the whole thing. I've not set a split method. It's splitting because of my maximum stitch length. So you can do minimum length for random phase. You can do a random seed, re-roll. minimum stitch length. So if you don't want anything less than, say, 1/2 mil, let's set that to a 1. You'll see a lot of the outside is missing because it sets a stitch point, and if it can't reach the edge in that minimum stitch length of 1, it's going to say never mind and go the other direction. So be careful with that one. And again, allows lock stitches and all that. So, and then trim after if you want it to trim, and stop after if you want your machine to stop. For example, when doing an applique, you do the outline stitch, you need it to stop sewing so you can put a piece of fabric in there. That doesn't count when you're doing just satin stitching, but there could be reasons you want it to stop before it picks up the next one and that sort of thing. So I'm going to set these, I guess I'm going to leave everything kind of like it is. I'm going to get rid of that maximum stitch length. We're no longer split stitching. Hit apply and quit. So this next thing is very cool. This is only available in this most recent version. And it's a multicolor satin. I have it highlighted, extensions, Inkstitch, satin tools, and multicolor satin. And what we can do is add another color to it, and it's going to select it on the other side. You don't really want to keep the original satin because you're going to be doing 2 layers of satin in the same thing. So uncheck, keep original. Okay, so if we zoom in, we'll see that our columns are straight down the middle, kind of like what we didn't want before when we did a split. So you have this plus right here, and that will actually set an offset in the in-between. You can see that offset in the in-between. And we're also going to give it a little bit of pole comp so that it definitely overlaps. Now that pole comp's going to make your satin's column a little bit bigger than it was before. So just keep that in mind. It's not a bad idea to make your satin column a little smaller than you were going to originally, and then as you're adjusting it, make it bigger. But when is this handy? This is handy, for example, if you're doing just right off the top, I'm going to say doing a tree. We're going to set one side for a light brown, and we're going to set the other side at a darker brown. Give me a custom color. Give me a brown. What is a brown? Okay, there's a brown. There's a darker brown. Select. So now you have a tree with some highlight on one side and some shadow on the other side, just for an example. And you can also make it a little rougher by doing a little overflow. Let's exaggerate that overflow so you can really see it. And it's hard to see, but this side over here is getting a little rough looking. I'm not sure what the number represents. It's definitely not mils, I don't think. So let's apply. And there's our multi-satin group. And we're going to do an extension Inkstitch, visualize, simulate. That is very cool. Now preview has moved in this version. I'm going to select this, go to extensions, Inkstitch, visualize, and do a stitch plan preview, which you have all of these options. Move stitch plan beside canvas, which is probably a good idea because otherwise you got to hide your original to see it. Needle points, lock, display command signals, render jump stitches. So the one that I check most often is just move stitch plan beside the canvas. You have your very realistic view, realistic vector, which can be really slow, or just a standard realistic view. Hit apply, hit close, and there's our realistic preview. That's what it looks like. And just to cover both bases, let's go ahead and do a extensions Inkstitch. Let's do that realistic preview again, and we'll do a high quality. Hit apply, close, and there's our high quality. So that is a multicolor satin stitch made in Inkstitch. Very, very cool. So I'm actually going to Control Z until I come out of that multicolor satin group. And there's my original. Almost. I got to reconvert it. Okay, because I went one step too many. Okay, back to the original. So we're going to look at another very cool thing is we can set a pattern to the satin stitch. The way you set a pattern is you create a pattern and then you group your satin stitch and the pattern in the same group. Anything that's in that group is going to take that pattern. So I'll show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to make a pattern from this design right here. I'll make it a little bit tighter. Something like that. Yeah, I like it. So I'm going to use this as my pattern. Let's get some of that real close there. Yeah, something like that. So that's going to be my pattern. Now I need both of these to be in the same group. So I'm going to select both of those, do Object, Group. Now they're in the same group. I'm going to select my pattern design, go Extensions, Inkstitch, and Edit. I believe it's here. Yep, Selection to Pattern. And then you see this little icon right here. That means it's a pattern item. And I'm going to select the group. And now we're just going to look at it in Simulator. Kind of hard to tell. It's working. I can tell from that it's working. So I'm going to show the needle points. There's your needle points. That's actually what it's going to look like when it stitches out. The needle points make the design. So we'll try to look at that in a realistic preview. Extensions, Inkstitch, Visualize. Go to Stitch Plan Preview, Realistic View, move stitch beside canvas, hit apply. Close. Right there's my design, and with the pattern in it. That is very cool. Really like pattern design. We're going to make another one. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that and just delete it. No longer has the pattern. Extensions, Inkstitch, Visualize, Simulator. And it's stitching only on each side now, so pattern's gone. We're going to make a new pattern. Oh, I need to get rid of that Stitch Plan Preview. Okay, so we're going to make a new one. This one's going to be more of a hand-built. And what I'll do is, what do I want to do? I'm going to make something like that. I'm going to go into fill and stroke. Let's make sure there's no fill. There's a stroke style. We want mill be about 1. And what is it? Too small for that. Mill 0.2. That is weird. All right, let me start over. Let me do that again. So the mill is 0.2. I guess I just made it too small. Yeah, it's just too small. Let's bring it over here. Let's make it a little bit bigger. Something like that. I'm going to click it again. I'm going to spin it around like that. Let's see. Width, height. Go 5 by 5. I'm going to duplicate that. Move the duplicate up. Nope, didn't duplicate. Duplicate. Control D duplicates. Bring that one up. Duplicate again. Bring it up. Duplicate. Bring it up. Now that I have this many, I'm going to select all of them. Duplicate again. Bring it on up. Now that I have that many, I'm going to select them all. Duplicate again. Drag that up. Select them all again. Duplicate. And probably didn't have to do that again. Nope, I didn't. So let me undo that. And we'll just grab a handful of them. Duplicate. Drag them up. Perfect. Select them all. Duplicate. Drag it off to the side. I might go down. Let's see. Something like that. And then select them all again and combine. Now all those bits are one thing now, as you can see in here. But I need that to be in that group, so I'm just going to grab that and drag it down into that group. Now that it's in the group, I'm going to click it again so I get little turn handles. Drag it over the top. Turned a little too far, bring it back. Perfect. Now, it's already highlighted. Inkstitch, edit, selection to pattern. You can see the little pattern icon. Select that group. Extensions, Inkstitch, visualize, simulate. Can't really tell it in simulator until you hit needle points. Now you can really see it. That is the pattern that's on that column. Outstanding. And we'll just do a real quick, let's see, stitch plan preview and then realistic view beside canvas. Hit apply. Hit close. And there is our preview. And you can see that pattern that's in there. I'm going to show you one more way to make a pattern, and then we'll let this go. There's another way to make the pattern. I'm going to delete stitch plan preview and delete that pattern. Now, this one's pretty cool too. This one will come in handy a lot. So we're going to make this pattern by doing pattern along path. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw a straight line path. And then we're going to draw a circle. Something to that effect. Make it black so we can see it a little better. Okay, so we're going to select our circle. And I'm just going to copy. Control C will copy. Then I'm going to select this line that we made and do pattern along path. And then it's going to ask you for pattern source. And I copied it. So I already copy path. Let's do paste path. Go extensions, Inkstitch, edit, selection to pattern. There's a little pattern icon. Select that. Extensions, Inkstitch, visualize, simulate. Show our needle points, and there's our pattern on that particular design, that satin stitch, just like it should be. So I'm going to show you another thing. I'm going to exaggerate the size of this just a little bit, doing something like that. I need to select just the one. Like that, and nope, and like, come on now, give me the one. That. and shrink it down a little bit. Okay, so now, I'm going to make another satin stitch. I'm actually going to do it with the one that's already there. I'm just going to duplicate that. Check that out. And I'm going to pop that duplicate out of selection. I'm going to scoot it over. So now we have a satin stitch next to each other. It looks like it's going to have the pattern applied to it. But since it's not in the group, it's not going to be applied to it. So we'll go extensions, Inkstitch, simulate. Go ahead and let that run through. And check our stitch points. So only one of those columns actually got the pattern applied to it because it's not in the group. Hit close. I'm going to do an undo, which is going to put it back in the group, and then we're going to look at it again. Now they're both in the group. I need to select that one and pull it over. So now both of those columns are in the same group, or in the pattern group. So both of those will get the pattern applied to it. Visualize, simulate. Go ahead and show our stitch points. So now both of those are getting our pattern because both of those are in the same pattern group. Keep that in mind. So this video is getting pretty long. I'm sure I forgot something. I tried to cover everything. If I missed something, let me know. I'll try to cover it in a later video. Other than that, yeah, this one's getting long. As always, thank you so much for watching.